Imagine two people, same age, same job title, same exact salary, $100,000 a year. One lives in Austin, Texas, the other lives in San Francisco, California. At the end of the year, the one in Austin has managed to save $18,000, built a small emergency fund, maybe even started investing. The one in San Francisco? They're in debt. Not because they made bad decisions, not because they bought a boat or blew money at the casino. They just lived there. Same income, two completely different financial realities. And here's the thing nobody tells you. This isn't a lifestyle problem, it's a math problem, a geography problem, a system problem. And once you see how it actually works, once you run the real numbers, you will never look at a salary the same way again. We live in a country where six figures has become shorthand for success. Cross that $100,000 threshold and you've supposedly made it. You're comfortable, responsible, ahead of a curve. But the dollar, the actual purchasing power of $1, is not the same in every zip code. And the gap between cities isn't just wide, in some cases it's almost absurd. This video is about that gap. It's about what $100,000 actually buys you in different American cities, not the fantasy version, the real version. After taxes, after rent, after groceries, after all the invisible costs that don't show up in a job offer letter. And by the end, you might find yourself questioning whether the city you live in or the city you're planning to move to is actually working for you, or quietly working against you. Let's start with the basics, because they matter more than most people realize. When economists talk about purchasing power, they use a concept called the cost of living index. Think of it like a scoreboard for how far your money goes. The national average is set at 100. A city that scores 90 means your dollar goes further there. A city that scores 130 means everything costs about 30% more than average. Simple enough. But here's where it gets interesting. Most people, when they think about cost of living, they think about rent. And yes, rent is a massive factor, but it's not the whole picture. There's also state income tax, local tax, sales tax, the price of groceries, healthcare costs, transportation, childcare, which in some major cities costs more than a mortgage. All of these things stack. And when they stack in the wrong direction, that $100,000 salary starts to erode in ways that are genuinely alarming. Let's walk through some real cities, real numbers, and try to understand what's actually happening on the ground. Start with San Francisco. If you earn $100,000 in San Francisco, the federal government takes roughly $18,000 to $22,000 in income tax. California, which has the highest state income tax in the country, takes another $6,000 to $9,000. So before you've paid a single bill, you're already down to somewhere around $70,000 to $76,000 in take-home pay. Now comes rent. The median rent for a one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco is approximately $3,000 a month. That's $36,000 a year for one bedroom, which is, by the way, about 47 to 51% of your take-home pay, going directly to your landlord. Financial planners will tell you that rent should represent no more than 30% of your take-home. In San Francisco, on $100,000, it's nearly double that. So after rent, you have roughly $34,000 to $40,000 left for the entire year. That's the number you're actually working with. Food, transportation, utilities, healthcare, insurance, clothing, entertainment, savings, emergencies, everything. That's about $2,800 to $3,300 a month for everything else in one of the most expensive cities on the planet. When you put it that way, $100,000 in San Francisco doesn't sound like success. It sounds like survival. Now let's go somewhere very different. Let's go to Memphis, Tennessee. Same $100,000 salary, but the math shifts dramatically. Tennessee has no state income tax, zero. So your federal hit is the same, roughly $18,000 to $22,000, but you keep everything after that. Take-home lands somewhere around $88,000 to $82,000. Median rent for a one-bedroom in Memphis, approximately $900 to $1,100 a month. Call it $12,000 a year. That's about 15% of your take-home, well inside the healthy range. In fact, well under it. After rent, you have $66,000 to $70,000 left for the year. That's nearly double what you'd have in San Francisco after the same rent-to-income ratio is applied. Groceries in Memphis run about 8 to 10% below the national average. Healthcare costs are lower. If you own a car, gas and insurance are cheaper. The whole cost structure of the city is tilted in your favor. In Memphis, $100,000 can genuinely mean financial stability, room to save, room to invest, room to build something. In San Francisco, $100,000 is a slow leak. But here's where the story gets more complicated and more honest. Memphis isn't San Francisco, and that matters, not in a judgmental way, but in a real, practical way that people often forget when they're staring at spreadsheets. San Francisco, New York, Seattle, Boston, these cities are expensive because they're dense with economic opportunity. The job market is deeper, the industries are more concentrated, the networking is more powerful. The career trajectory for certain professions is genuinely steeper in those places. A software engineer who starts at $100,000 in San Francisco at 25 might be earning $300,000 by 32. That same engineer in Memphis, if they can even find an equivalent role, might top out at $130,000. The ceiling is different. The acceleration is different. So the question isn't just where does my money go furthest, it's where does my money grow fastest? And those are two completely different questions with completely different answers. This is the tension at the heart of the whole thing. The cities that consume your money the fastest are often the cities that can increase your earning power the most. And the cities where your money goes furthest are often the cities where that money is hardest to dramatically increase. It's not a trap exactly, but it's close. Let's keep adding cities to the picture because the variation is striking. Dallas, Texas, no state income tax, like Tennessee. Cost of living index around 101, essentially the national average. Median one-bedroom rent around $1,400 to $1,600 a month. On $100,000, you take home roughly $78,000 to $82,000. After rent, you have $62,000 to $66,000 to work with. Dallas is broadly considered one of the best value cities in America right now for professionals, particularly in finance, tech, and healthcare, which have been actively relocating there. Austin, Texas, same no income tax benefit, but Austin's cost of living has exploded over the last 5 years. Median one-bedroom rent is now around $1,700 to $2,000. The cost of living index has jumped to roughly 120 to 125, up from the low 100s in 2018. Austin is a city that was an incredible deal 6 years ago and since been priced up by its own popularity. That's its own kind of cautionary tale. New York City. Combined federal, state, and city income tax on $100,000 can push your effective rate to around 30 to 34%. Take home, roughly $66,000 to $70,000. Manhattan one-bedroom median, approximately $3,500 to $4,000. Which means, like San Francisco, rent alone can devour 60% or more of take-home. Outer boroughs are more forgiving. Brooklyn and Queens can run $2,000 to $2,500, but commuting costs, local taxes, and general NYC overhead still put serious pressure on that number. Chicago, Illinois, state income tax of 4.95%. Take-home on $100,000, roughly $72,000 to $75,000. Median rent for a one-bedroom around $1,800 to $2,200, depending on neighborhood. Cost of living index around 107. Chicago is often overlooked in these conversations. It's one of the major American cities where $100,000 still functions like a real salary. The trade-off is a city with some structural economic challenges: high property taxes, pension crises, population decline. You get more value from your money, but the city's long-term trajectory is something to watch. There's a concept in economics called the real wage. It strips away the nominal number, the one on your contract, and asks what your wage actually purchases in the real world. And when you compare real wages across American cities, the picture is genuinely startling. A 2023 study by the Missouri Economic Information and Research Center found that $100,000 in Manhattan was equivalent in purchasing power to about $35,791 in Harlingen, Texas, a small city near the Mexican border where the cost of living is among the lowest in the country. Read that again. The same $100,000 paycheck, a 64% difference in real purchasing power. That's not a rounding error. That's a completely different life. And yet, people chase the number, the nominal number,
the $100,000 or $150,000 or $200,000 without stopping to calculate what it actually translates to in their specific zip code, after tax, after rent, after all the things the offer letter never mentions. Part of why this happens is psychology. Specifically, something behavioral economists call money illusion, the tendency to think about money in nominal terms rather than real terms. We anchor to the number itself rather than what it buys. A job offer of $120,000 in New York feels better than $85,000 in Raleigh, North Carolina. Numerically, obviously. But after taxes and cost of living adjustments, the Raleigh salary might actually deliver more purchasing power, more savings capacity, and less financial stress. The $120,000 just looks bigger. It sounds better at dinner parties. It scans more impressively on LinkedIn. But it might actually be the worst deal. We're not wired to think in real terms. We're wired to compare numbers. And cities and employers know this. High cost of living cities can attract talent by offering salaries that sound extraordinary but deliver ordinary purchasing power. And the people taking those jobs often don't realize what's happening until they've been living there for a year and wonder why their bank account looks the way it does. Now zoom out further, because there's a bigger, slower-moving story underneath all of this. Between 2020 and 2024, remote work cracked open a possibility that didn't really exist before at scale: geographic arbitrage. The idea that you could earn a San Francisco or New York salary while living somewhere that costs a fraction as much. And for a few years, it worked. Tech workers, in particular, flooded into places like Boise, Idaho, Scottsdale, Arizona, Nashville, Tennessee, Asheville, North Carolina. They brought their Bay Area salaries with them, and the local economies couldn't absorb the demand. Rents spiked, home prices spiked, restaurants filled up, traffic got worse. The infrastructure of small and mid-sized cities buckled slightly under the weight of people who were, economically speaking, playing on a completely different field. What happened next was almost inevitable. The cost of living in those affordable cities started rising fast. Boise went from a cost of living index around 97 in 2019 to well over 115 by 2023. Nashville crept up. Asheville became something else entirely. The arbitrage window didn't close completely, but it narrowed. The people who moved earliest captured the most value. The people who moved in 2022 and 2023 often found a city that was already half priced out, with the local service sector straining and longtime residents increasingly displaced. And then the return to office mandate started. Some of those remote workers had to choose, move back or find a new job. Many found a new job, but the era of frictionless geographic arbitrage, earn San Francisco, spend Boise, has become more complicated than the optimistic version that went viral on finance Twitter in 2021. Here's something worth sitting with for a moment. The cities that feel most financially punishing are, in many cases, also the cities with the most political power, the most concentrated media, the most influential professional networks. The people who write the narratives about what success looks like, what a good salary means, what the good life costs, disproportionately live in those expensive cities. Which means the benchmarks we're given culturally tend to be calibrated to the most expensive places. 6 figures as the threshold of comfort was probably always more true in Memphis than in Manhattan, but it got defined in Manhattan. There's something almost structurally unfair about the way this information is distributed. The people with the most sophisticated understanding of cost of living math, the financial advisors, the economists, the personal finance creators, tend to live in expensive coastal cities and apply the lessons accordingly. The average person taking a job offer or considering a move is comparing nominal numbers without a framework to translate them into real ones. And that gap between what people know and what they would need to know to make truly informed decisions is where a lot of quiet financial damage gets done. So what does this all mean practically? If you're evaluating a job offer, a city move, or even just trying to understand why your salary doesn't feel like it should, the number you need isn't your salary. It's your salary after state and local taxes, minus your rent as a percentage of take-home adjusted for the local cost of living index. That number, that real adjusted purchasing power number, is what you're actually living on. And in some cities, it's going to look dramatically different from the headline figure. There are tools that can help. NerdWallet and CNN both have cost of living calculators. The Bureau of Economic Analysis publishes regional price parity data by state. These aren't exotic resources. They're freely available, and most people never use them before making a $100,000 a year plus decision. The math isn't complicated, it's just ignored. And that, probably more than any individual financial mistake, is what quietly keeps people from building the financial life they thought their salary promised them. Which brings us back to those two people, Austin and San Francisco. Same salary, two different financial universes. Here's the part of that story that doesn't resolve cleanly. The one in San Francisco, stressed, leveraged, saving almost nothing, might be building something. Connections, skills, a professional reputation inside an industry that rewards proximity. They might be setting up a decade of compounding career gains that eventually makes the sacrifice look rational. Or they might burn out at 34, leave the city with no savings, and wonder what they were doing the whole time. The one in Austin, stable, saving, building a financial cushion, might be thriving. Or they might be quietly plateauing in a market that doesn't push them the way the brutal, competitive, expensive one would have. The uncomfortable truth is that there is no universally correct answer. There's only the answer that fits your specific situation, your specific ambitions, and your specific risk tolerance. And you cannot find that answer by looking at the nominal salary number alone. $100,000 is not a number, it's a variable. And what it actually equals depends entirely on the city, the state, the tax code, and the specific economic ecosystem you're dropping it into. That's the thing nobody says in the job offer. Nobody says it in the recruiter call. Nobody says it in the LinkedIn congratulations post. But the math says it. Every single month when you check your bank account and wonder where it went.